But yeah, we're going to get started. Ani is part of our fabulous team in public relations. And I think everybody knows Emily here. Emily is our Director of Advocacy and Community Relations. So take it away, y'all.
Thanks for the intro, Jess. Emily, if you're ready to get started, I have questions ready for you. So for those of us who aren't familiar, can you tell us a little bit more about what HR 707 is?
Absolutely. So I'm particularly proud of HR 7057. It has been a long, hard road, but in short, HR 7057 is called the Understanding COVID Subsets and MECFS Act, which is abbreviated UCS MECFS Act. It was introduced by Representative Jamie Raskin on May 28th at the end of MECFS Awareness Month. It is currently pending consideration by the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Just as a quick side note, not to be confused, even though they happened on the same day, which was intentional, that HR 7057 is separate and distinct from the Senate action led by Senator Markey, which actually happened on the same day, which actually was requesting the same legislative solutions, except one was a Senate action, which was directed towards Senate leadership, a different process than HR 7057, which is the more traditional introduce a bill in the House, which is usually the chamber of origin, as they call it, or where legislation is beginning at the House level. Even though these two actions call for the same policy solutions, which is increased research funding for MECFS, and they were introduced on the same day, which is easy to confuse, they are in fact two different actions. To quickly summarize, HR 7057 authorizes funding at the NIH for MECFS research regarding COVID long haulers, the development of post-viral MECFS, and of course, traditional MECFS. I'm especially excited about this legislation because it removes several legislative barriers that I had identified in the 4 years working on Capitol Hill on MECFS full time. And with those barriers removed, it gives us a lot more advocacy opportunities in the future to grow MECFS research funding in a more meaningful way. So I'll just stop there. I know there's a lot more detail I could go into, but that's kind of a big picture summary of what the bill is and does.
So could you also tell us about how this legislation came to be?
Absolutely. So when I first joined Solve MECFS Initiative, like many of you, I was very confused and alarmed and angry about why MECFS didn't see the same level of research funding that a lot of other diseases tend to receive, especially at the NIH. So I started doing a lot of research, and my first 2 weeks here, I did like a full literature review. I guess that's a scientific term, but I can't describe it in any other way, where I searched all of the online congressional records, which were from 1991 all the way to present, and searched for the term chronic fatigue syndrome, MECFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis. I tried to find any mention in the congressional record of our disease at all, and was surprised that we really didn't have many mentions whatsoever, much less, and this is sort of the key, an authorization language. And that is really important to try and get more money, because it's sort of like building a pipeline of funding to pump the money through, but we didn't even have a pipeline. So this was something that I immediately identified as something that really had to be addressed, mainly because without a pipeline, where we land into what's called discretionary funding, or what I kind of call optional funding. And I was very concerned, and I remember sitting down in Carol's office and saying, you know, if something more politically dangerous comes along, say a big virus or a big pandemic or a big medical scare, there is nothing legislatively or legally to prevent the NIH from stopping all work on MECFS. There's no backstop. There's no congressional authorization that demands that NIH must use funds in certain ways. So I was immediately concerned from the very beginning that our funding was unprotected, that literally at the whims of change, we could be defunded. So that's why the genesis of HR 7057 was about finding authorization language in Congress, because that would be something that could protect us from that winds of change discretionary danger. So it has always been my intention from the very beginning to find a way to get authorization language for MECFS. when COVID first hit the scene, and we started seeing those early reports about post-COVID cases of ME/CFS and the long haulers and people who were starting to tell stories that people in this ME/CFS community know so well, I found the opportunity and really made it a key priority to address that authorization, and I saw this as an opportunity to do so. So the bill itself, we immediately approached several different legislators, including Representative Raskin, who also saw the potential danger of a large virus sweeping through the population and the potential for ME/CFS to follow in its wake, as historically has happened multiple times in the past. And together we hammered out this kind of sample language, which eventually became HR 7057.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that insight. I was also wondering if this year's Advocacy Day impacted this legislation at all.
Absolutely. Wow, 100%. One of the things that I'm really proud of Advocacy Day this year, well, there's a lot of things I'm very proud about with Advocacy Day this year, but in addition to canceling all of our in-person events in the very early February, when the disease and the pandemic were just kind of starting to accelerate, that gave us about 6 weeks to take all of our in-person events and take them online. So that was a big challenge. But simultaneously, we also recognized that our traditional asks, what we were intending and had spent a year preparing for, was an increase to appropriations funding for an epidemiological study. That was our big push that we were planning before the pandemic. And as the planning was continuing, going closer, especially in early March, and these data sets were becoming more apparent about the long impacts of COVID, we completely shifted our message. So we moved away from the conversation about funding better epidemiological work for ME/CFS and started talking about long COVID. And that pivot really laid the groundwork for this bill's success. We would not have been able to have gotten the strong support we have, the robust bipartisan support we have, without the over 200 plus advocates who participated, actually 300, I'm sorry, 300 advocates who participated in over 250 meetings in April.
Awesome. So this is going to be a lofty question, but what do you hope that this legislation will accomplish and how it'll change the field of ME/CFS research?
Great question. So I think that my biggest hopes are for the two pieces that are specifically described in the bill. Obviously, we were hoping to fast track the bill. So my biggest hope, and what I hope will happen, is that this bill becomes part of the upcoming COVID relief packages that are currently being discussed in Congress. That some of the numbers that have been bandied about by Senate Republicans is a $15.5 billion increase for NIH. And I'm hoping that this bill will become a friend, like a companion of that package, and specifically set aside 15 million of that 15.5 billion to expand ME/CFS research looking into post-viral impacts, specifically around COVID-19. So that's my hope. And why that's so important is because it allows us to kind of leapfrog the process. Whereas if this bill passed on its own, which is also a really positive thing, it'll still have all those impacts. But being able to be attached to one of those fast-tracked bills, because those bills authorize and appropriate all in the same breath. And so we would be hopefully having to, if we were attached, we would then be able to move this forward much, much faster. So that's my first hope, is that we can do that. Once the bill is passed, either in the form of a COVID relief package, either passed on its own, or some other mechanism of getting passed, there's probably 100 different pathways to the president's desk. Once we get passed and implemented, the second challenge is going to be funding it. Again, if we use that leapfrog process, we'll be automatically funded. But if we pass through traditional mechanisms, we'll need to get appropriated. Once all that happens, so there's a lot of steps between now and then, I'm really excited because I think what this bill will do is two things for the research field. It will, first of all, pump much needed resources into the NIH and sort of give NIH political cover to work on ME/CFS. It's if Congress has already set aside money and has expressed an interest, that gives them a lot more freedom to invest as well in ME/CFS, because they have that political cover. They're not being distracted from other political priorities. They clearly have support in doing that work. Secondly, I really hope it will, that will be a strong statement to the MECFS research field more broadly. This is a field that Congress is interested in, the NIH is interested, that there's money and a future in. So hopefully a lot of researchers will be compelled to enter the field as a result. Lastly, one item I'm particularly proud of is the very small, it's only like a few sentences long, medical education component. There are several different programs within the HHS that fund and implement medical and public education programs. This particular language inserts us into the most well-funded program as an option. Right now, we're not an option, where it's sort of like a menu is written in statute. So in this menu, there's a whole lot of money, and the Secretary of HHS can choose which areas that money is spent in. Right now, MECFS is not on the menu. We are not an option. So that second piece of the bill, which is so tiny in text, but so meaningful and large in purpose, would add MECFS medical and public education to that menu. And then, of course, our advocacy team can then work on convincing HHS that it's the right choice to put that money into this program.
Gotcha. And we've talked a lot already about long haulers. How will this legislation affect that community of individuals still experiencing symptoms of COVID-19?
Oh gosh, first of all, if there are any long haulers on the call and folks who are experiencing long haul, I am so sorry. And the rest of the MECFS community it feels you, knows your pain, and is with you. This is not an isolated event with these folks experiencing this, and it's been happening for decades with people with MECFS. And so we know that your struggle is very hard and very real, and it can be frustrating to hear that a piece of legislation like this is not going to immediately help your situation. And that's the hard truth, that the irregular COVID-19 long hauler who's currently expecting symptoms is not going to instantly be better or instantly have a treatment as a result of this legislation. But what it does do is two things: expanding research, helping us understand why some people with a viral infection will later come down with MECFS. Most likely some of these long haulers are in this camp. Is there something about the genetic makeup, about your lifestyle, about risk assessment? Maybe it has something to do with your diet. We don't know. But the research that can be funded through this legislation, specifically targeting MECFS and the connection to long COVID, I think will be the fastest way we can get to treatments. And the other reason why I think there's a lot of hope for the COVID long hauler community with this legislation is because these programs already exist at the NIH. MECFS has been a 4-year program with the intramural study and on the community, the consortium centers as well. Like, all of these programs have already existed. So it's only going to make these results come faster that we're expanding existing programs into these areas. The protocol's already set, the labs are already ready to go, the beds at the NIH center are already there, which is so much faster than trying to create a new program from scratch where we have to go back to the drawing board. The MECFS community has spent decades getting these programs at the NIH operational. And so hopefully the long hauler community can sort of join us and step on our shoulders to be able to take advantage of these research programs rather than starting at baseline and creating everything from scratch. So that's the one reason why the long hauler community can be really excited about this legislation, because I do really believe it'll be the fastest way to get treatments, which will hopefully be applicable both to the COVID cases of MECFS and the original cases of MECFS that happened before COVID. Secondly, as so many of you know, medical education is critical. The patient experience in this disease space is abysmal. And any person who has gone through a health journey with a bad doctor on MECFS or an uneducated doctor on MECFS knows exactly how painful and harmful, stressful, and heartbreaking it can be. So my hope is that if we can fast track the medical education, especially attached to COVID, we will legitimize MECFS. We will get critical information that we've known for years out to the frontline fighters in the medical community so that they will be more aware of how to appropriately treat MECFS, specifically post-COVID MECFS, and that hopefully, this long hauler community will not have to repeat these same painful experiences that the MECFS community has.
Great. So do you have any updates or recent developments for the community about this legislation?
Absolutely. So we just got 3 new co-sponsors this week. So we're up to 32 co-sponsors, 1 additional Republican. So we are continuing our strong path of trying our best to be bipartisan. So definitely more Republicans are hopefully in the wings waiting for their colleagues to jump forward, and then they will jump forward as well. So we're really excited about those updates. And also, as the conversations, I'm sure many of you have been watching the news regarding the Senate and House negotiations for the upcoming COVID package, all of those co-sponsorships and all of that education that the advocates in our team are doing with Congress will only put us in a better position to be included, hopefully, again, in the upcoming COVID response legislation. Specifically, we know that there's some conversations about separating the scientific and non-scientific components. For example, business loans, economic supports, job creation. That's kind of one separate item, and then the scientific response, boosting response, testing and disease tracking has sort of been separated into another category. So we're clearly in that scientific category more so than the emergency economic category. But I really hope, and I'm really positive, I really think we're going to have a lot of success educating Congress on this issue and being included in the future.
Great. So with all of this being said, how can community members get involved in the effort to advocate for this legislation?
Well, the community members are the backbone of making this happen. So we are so grateful and excited to have members of the community and their family and friends take action to support with us. I'd say the 3 biggest things that the members of the community can do, they're actually all listed out in our Action Toolkit Center that we just launched this week. So very excited to share that. The web address for that is www.solvecfs.org/HR 7057 Action Center, all one word, all lowercase. That's solvecfs.org/HR 7057 Action Center. And on that Action Center, you'll see 3 different types of activities. And those are the 3 best things you can do. You can make a phone call, you can send an email, or you can post on social media. And that those 3 actions taken in across the board with a massive response from everybody in many districts will really pave the way to our success.
Awesome. So if you don't have anything else to add, I think at this point, we're going to stop the recording and begin hopefully a more honest conversation about our strategy for this legislation. And Emily, thank you so much for your time and your work on this. Jesse, should we open up the field to some questions from the community now?
And Jesse, before you open up the lines, I just want to say a quick round of applause for Ani. Thank you, Ani. We are so happy to have you as part of our team. Welcome to the Solve ME Communications and PR.